Can you guys hear me now? Okay, perfect. All right, let's keep going. So the idea is that I have to get rid of the 168. So I'm going to subtract 168 from both sides. And then I'm going to move, well, I think I got a little bit of room. 4x squared plus 36x minus 88. All right, so here's going to be where we're going to have problems because I'm going to run out of room very quickly with doing these problems. Because the next thing we got to do is take all of this information, which of course equals 0, and we're going to apply the quadratic formula. So I will start it on the left, but then I'm going to have to go to another page. Ms. Newman is recording this, so you'll only miss the beginning half. But other than I have that, so you're going to have a two-part recording this time. So we're going to start off with what is A, B, and C. Let's get rid of all of this. You really don't care about this. This will give me more space. Okay. So I have A is 4, B is 36, and C is negative 88. I'm telling you now, you don't have a calculator, you're going to want one. So I have negative C, which is negative 36, plus or minus the square root of B squared, which is 36 times 36 is 1296, minus 4 times A is 4, and C is negative 88, divided by 2 times 4, which is 8. And all that's equal to, of course, x. So we are going to keep going because this is what we're looking for is x. So I get negative 36 plus or minus. So negative 4 times 4 is 16. Negative 16. Negative 16 times negative 88 is 1,408. 1296 plus 1408. Then I divide all that, of course, by 8. So then you add it underneath the radicand, and you're going to get 2,704. Over 8. Now, you'll be surprised because I know I was. The square root of 2,704 is 52. So I get x equals negative 36 plus or minus 52 over 8. So far, this is just a review of what we did yesterday as far as doing all of this. Next step is where you go a little off. So I'm going to start off with splitting it up with negative 36 plus 52 over 8. And then I have, of course, negative 36 minus 52 over 8. And some of you will realize a pattern and just know when you have to do both and when you don't. So when I do negative 36 plus 52 divided by 8 in my calculator, I get 2. And when I do negative 36 divided or minus negative 52 divided by 8, I get negative 11. So there's a small problem here. Remember from my original picture that I had, so I'll draw it really small, x is this area here on all of them. So x cannot ever be a negative 11. So it has to always be a positive value. And as you're going along, you'll get to notice these and you'll be able to realize which ones are needed and which ones aren't. Because if I looked at the problem, I knew my numerator on the right would automatically have been negative, and I would have never, ever done that work to begin with. Right? Any questions so far? Because all we found out is what is x equal to. Nope. All right. Does anybody have a clue what I'm going to do with x in order to figure out what the length of the sides were?
Plug the number into the equation.
Yes, exactly. So you are going to go up to just these individual little parts. So I do 2 times 2 is 4. 4 plus 8 is 12. So that's one side. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 plus 10 is 14 is the other side. So one length was 14, the other was 12. And that's all they wanted you to do. Okay? Sometimes they'll ask you, what is that? Sometimes they'll ask you to set up an equation. Sometimes they'll just ask you what the length and the width are. You just have to be able to do all those different ways. Any questions? Mm-hmm. Okay. Then we are going to go on to the next one. So that is how you're going to do those. And then I'm going to go over how to do the other type of problem. And if you get it, you can go ahead and leave. If you don't, then we will keep going. But Miss Newman felt like I record the beginning half. And then after that, she doesn't need to record anymore after this problem. Because then it's just repetition of doing the same thing over and over again. So now this is where we were talking about how long is an object in the air, and we're going to look at for like their maximum height. So those two different things. I'm just trying to change my Wi-Fi on my computer, see if that helps. I can't even find the second Wi-Fi. All right. So let's say you're kicking a ball, and when you kick the ball, it went 16 whatever units fast. And let's say you started at, oh, this is a juggling one. So you're going to start kicking the ball at 32 centimeters above the ground. And we want to know how long is that ball in the air. So we start off with that problem of h of t equals negative 16t squared plus v t plus s. So that's always where you're going to start every time. I find it easier when I think about it. I think V for velocity. So speed, things like that. S, I always think of where I start. So V is 16, so I'm going 16 units. And I start at 32 centimeters. So those are going to be what I substitute in. Ha ha ha, the computer has decided to join us again. Hold on. Okay, I had to turn off my computer audio. All right, so far so good, right? So that you know, what you're going to do is plug that in there, plug that in there. And this is going to give you your A, B, and C for your quadratic formula. So I have h of t equals negative 16t squared plus 16 t's plus 32. And the reason I think of that as the starting is because if you're just kicking a ball off the ground, you start at 0. And you always think of like your, like kind of when your y-intercept and stuff, even though it's not your y-intercept, that's where you start off thinking about. All right, so A is negative 16, B is 16, C is 32. So what we're finding out with this, and I want you to notice, is we're finding out how long it's in the air. I'm running out of room, so great grammar. Now, I start off negative 16 plus or minus the square root of 16 squared, which is 256, thanks to my handy calculator, minus 4 times A is negative 16 times C is 32. All that is over 2 times A, which is negative 16. Portia, stop. And this, don't forget, we're looking for X. So this right here is what I want to do the math for first in my calculator. And I get 2,048. So I get negative 16 plus or minus the square root of 256 plus 2,048. And I want to tell you guys, when I do this, I like to keep everything in my calculator as long as I can before I have to exit it out. And that's going to be over negative 32. Now, with all of these problems, your denominator will always be negative 32 because your A is always negative 16. So that's a nice little thing to think about, that you're always going to have negative 32 there. Next, I add what's underneath the square root. So I get negative 16 plus or minus the square root of 2,304 over negative 32. So then I go ahead and type in my calculator what's the square root of 2,304, and I'm going to get 48, which is nice. I love these nice, neat problems. If I didn't have a nice, neat problem, I just keep going until I get what X is an approximate answer. I start off rounding at least to 4 places past, because a lot of times they want you to do 2 in your final answer, and you do not want to goof it up. So then I have X, you have negative 16, negative sign, plus or minus 48 over negative 32. So if you remember before, I told you I can't have a negative answer. So when I'm dividing by a negative 32, I'm going to have, if I was doing what I was doing before for height of something, I would have noted that I would have had to have a negative in the top. It doesn't matter with these because you should have 2 x-intercepts because it's a parabola. But those are just little hints for those other problems so you can see it without doing extra work. So I have that one, which is going to give me Miss Newman wanted you guys to know X and T are identical now. They're interchangeable because X is here and I just always have a habit of writing X, but T is the exact same thing. But it's because it's talking about velocity and time and stuff. That's why they change it to T. And then I get, let me type it in my calculator, negative 64 over negative 32. Well, that's easy, that's 2. Do it again, and I get negative 16. This time is plus 48 over negative 32. Type it in my calculator, and I get 32 over negative 32, which is negative 1. So those are your times, and of course, that means that it took 2 seconds or 2 units, whatever the time was. Okay. Any questions so far? Because the next step is going over max height, and it's the same problem. Okay. So next page. To do max height, it's not as difficult. I think this is the easier of the two. So I have h of t was my original problem, negative 16t squared plus 16 t plus 32. So that's the original problem. So to find the maximum height, it's exactly like finding your vertex. That's what you're doing, the y value in the vertex. But the only difference is instead of an x, we change it to a t. No different. They all mean the same thing. Just notice at the end that you always have your t. So negative b, oops, my arm hit the stupid things at the bottom, over 2a. Here, b is 16, so negative 16. A is, oops, that did not work. Negative 16 over, and then 2 times a is negative 2 times negative 16. So some of us would remember that I do negative 16 over negative 16 is 1. My answer is 1/2. But those of us that still need to see it, I multiply it out, and then I reduce it to 1/2. Either way works. So that gave you the X part of the vertex. And of course, if you remember thinking about your axes, your X is what's horizontal. And if I'm trying to find out what my peak is or what my valley is for something, I need to know where the Y is. The Y is what's important. The X only helps me find the Y. So this right here, you're going to substitute in for T. So I plug it in. I get H of T, which is what I'm looking for, because remember, think Y, equals negative 16 times 1/2 squared plus 16 times 1/2 plus 32. Next, I do 1/2 squared, which is 1/4. So that's really the same thing as writing negative 16 divided by 4, plus 1/2 of 16 is just 8 plus 32. And all that's got to equal H of T. I divide, I get negative 4 plus 8 plus 32. This right here gives me a 4. 4 plus 32 is 36. So the peak or the max height I have is 36 centimeters or whatever unit. So that would have been if, like this problem we were talking about, the guy should have been talking about the guy juggling. So if he juggled it and it went down, we figured out that it stayed in the air for about 2 seconds. But this point right here, which is the highest point, would have been that 36 units above the ground, whatever units we were talking about. But that's all that we were looking for and everything that we were doing. And that's everything you're doing in this unit itself. So I did write down a lot more of these practice problems for the how long in the air and the max height. So those of you that want to see more of these, that's what we're going to be doing. But Ms. Newman will be turning off the recording because that was just an example of each. Does anybody have a question with where we stay, like where we're at right now, before Ms. Newman turns off recording? So pull the chat. All righty then. So then Ms. Newman's going to shut off recording.